Welcome to Dill vs. the Village. We invite you to watch a video featuring our newest original story. Today, I tell the story of people who tried to set a trap and ended up falling into it themselves. If a family member ever tried to sabotage your life, drop your age in the comments and hit subscribe so you do not miss the moment I made the local news for what I did next. 11:51 p.m. My phone screen glowed, but it wasn't a sweet message from my fiancé. It was a notification, $35,000, my entire wedding venue deposit withdrawn and redirected. It was a joint wedding account I had foolishly authorized, thinking they were helping me manage vendors. I never imagined they would drain the entire balance behind my back. Seconds later, a text from my mother-in-law Stephanie arrived. It said, "Family needs come before your party, Kelsey. We've moved the dinner to the community center. Try to be grateful for what you have. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't drop my phone, I didn't gasp, and I certainly didn't cry. In my line of work, when a mission-critical component fails, you don't mourn the loss, you bypass it. I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand. 11:51 p.m. In 9 minutes, it would be tomorrow. In 48 hours, I was supposed to be walking down a sun-drenched aisle in the Willamette Valley. But the vineyard was gone. My $35,000 was gone. And according to Stephanie, I was supposed to be grateful for a folding chair and lukewarm punch in a community center basement. I sat up, the silk sheets feeling suddenly like a clinical shroud. My mind shifted into a high-level crisis management protocol. This wasn't a heartbreak, it was a hostile takeover. I reached for my work laptop, the cold aluminum casing under my fingers, feeling more honest than Trevor's touch had felt in months. I'd seen the red flags 3 days ago. Trevor had left his laptop open, and a stray notification about a family emergency litigation fund had caught my eye. I hadn't confronted him. Experience had taught me that when someone shows you they are a thief, you don't ask for the money back, you secure the remaining assets. I had prepared for a plan B without even admitting to myself why I was doing it. I logged into the corporate travel portal first. As a senior project director, my account was loaded with executive perks and massive travel vouchers. I had used those credits to upgrade the entire wedding party. Stephanie, Gary, Trevor, and his brother Mason to first-class seats and 5-star suites at the Vineyard Resort. My mouse hovered over the cancel all button. It wasn't an emotional choice, it was a simple reallocation of resources. Stephanie wanted to play matriarch on my dime while stealing my future? Fine. She could find her own way to the airport. I clicked. $12,000 in travel credits flooded back into my account. One by one, I voided the luxury hotel suites. I watched the confirmation emails roll in like a series of small, silent explosions. Next was the venue. The vineyard was Stephanie's dream, a stage where she could pretend the family firm wasn't rotting from the inside. My dream was different. 2 weeks ago, I had wrapped up a massive aerospace launch at the airport hangar. Part of my contract included a right of first refusal for the space for the remainder of the month to handle post-event logistics. I looked at the time, 12:03 a.m. I dialed Miller, the facility manager at the airport. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy. I didn't apologize for the hour. I told him I was activating the 90-minute emergency window for a private corporate event. "Kelsey, it's after midnight," he rasped. I gave him the project code and told him I'd double the cleaning fee. I didn't just book the space, I called my regular event contractors, the same elite team that had just handled the aerospace launch and authorized a rush premium to have a turnkey setup ready for 200 people by sunrise. By 1:34 a.m., the hangar was officially mine. I looked at the guest list on my screen. 200 people. Half of them were tech executives and venture capitalists. I had invited the very people Stephanie and Trevor intended to pitch during my wedding dinner. I opened the wedding app and sent a single mass update. New location, new instructions, no explanation. I rebranded the event in the app as an exclusive executive strategy gala, a title no high-level investor in my network would ever ignore, especially with the promise of a major announcement. My laptop glowed in the dark room, the only source of light. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was an audit. And for the first time in years, the balance sheet was starting to look correct. As I watched the hangar booking confirmation refresh on my screen, a strange clinical stillness settled over me. Most people would ask, how could you let it get this far? They would see a woman who had spent 48 months subsidizing a family that didn't even like her and call it weakness. But they don't understand the invisible chains of a survivor. In a narcissistic system, patience isn't a virtue, it's a survival mechanism. I hadn't been weak. I had been operating under a form of learned helplessness, conditioned to believe that if I just worked a little harder, if I covered just one more family emergency, I would finally earn my seat at the table. I was the high-performing asset in a portfolio of failing egos. For 4 years, I was the silent investor in their version of a happy family. When Trevor's brother Mason decided he was a failed visionary and racked up $40,000 in debt on a boutique sneaker line that never launched, I was the one who cleared the balance. When Trevor needed his CPA licensing fees and private tutoring because he couldn't pass the ethics portion of the exam on his own, I wrote the check. I told myself I was investing in our future. In reality, I was just paying the maintenance fees on his incompetence. I spent my 32nd year working 80-hour weeks, fueled by black coffee and the desperate hope that a wedding would finally make me real to them. I paid for Stephanie's society luncheons, where she bragged about her successful children, conveniently forgetting that her son's lifestyle was entirely funded by my bonus structure. I was the scaffolding holding up a rotted house, and I had become so used to the weight that I forgot I was the one who built the foundation. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. Every time Trevor forgot my birthday, but remembered to ask for a bridge loan for his mother's vineyard taxes, a small part of my respect for him died. But the chains were strong. I kept thinking that once we were married, the business of the family would stabilize. I thought the $35,000 I saved for the venue was the final payment on my freedom. But seeing that empty account at 11:51 p.m. broke the spell. The realization didn't come as a sob. It came as a balance sheet. I looked at the numbers and realized I had been funding my own betrayal. I had been the ATM, the safety net, and the scapegoat, all wrapped into one. I looked at Trevor's side of the bed. He was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about the litigation fund my money had just replenished. He didn't realize that the woman he'd been treating like a line item had just closed the account. I wasn't just moving a wedding. I was conducting a full-scale liquidation. This wasn't about a party anymore. This was about the 48 months of my life. I was never going to get back, and the interest I was about to collect on every single second. At 5 a.m, the silence of the penthouse was shattered by the frantic vibration of Trevor's phone on the nightstand. I didn't reach for it. I sat in the designer armchair by the window, a cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the gray light of dawn touch the Portland skyline. I knew exactly who was calling. Stephanie had likely just tried to check in for her first-class flight to the valley, only to find her reservation had vanished into the digital ether. Trevor groaned, fumbling for his phone. He looked at the screen, then at me, his eyes widening as he saw me fully dressed and wide awake. He answered on the third ring. Even from across the room, Stephanie's voice was a jagged blade of high-frequency panic. Trevor, something is wrong with the tickets. The airline says the vouchers were revoked, and the resort they told me our suites were canceled due to a credit failure. Do you have any idea what this is doing to my blood pressure? Trevor looked at me, his face pale. Kelsey, what's going on? I didn't blink. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Family needs, Trevor, I said. My voice as level as a horizon line, I redirected the resources. I assumed since you used my wedding money to pay off Mason's litigation, you wouldn't mind me using the travel budget to cover the overhead of my own sanity. He hung up on his mother, his expression shifting from confusion to a cold, ugly sneer. You think you're being clever? You have no idea what you've just done. He stood up, pacing the room like a trapped animal. This isn't just about a wedding anymore, Kelsey. My mother signed a contract with a production company. They're filming a pilot for a show called Family Legacy. The vineyard was the set. The investors you invited, those tech moguls, they were supposed to be the lead-ins for a new real estate investment trust my mother is launching. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. AREIT? The vineyard is in foreclosure, Trevor. I checked the public records. Your mother was going to use my wedding to pitch a fraudulent investment scheme to my professional mentors. It's not fraud if it works, he snapped. And now you've pulled the rug out from under the entire family. If that show doesn't film, and if those investors don't show up to the vineyard, we are finished. And if we go down, I'm taking you with me. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. You think your career is safe? I know exactly which proprietary software codes you borrowed for your last project launch. I know who you haven't been entirely transparent with at the airport authority. You play your part. You put on that dress, you call the airline and fix the tickets, and you get those people to the vineyard tomorrow. If you don't, I will make sure you never work in this town again. I'll make you a pariah before the sun goes down. He was bluffing. Those codes were my own IP, developed on my personal time and properly documented, while his threats were just the desperate gaslighting of a man with no cards left to play. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had shared a bed with for years was gone. In his place was a small, desperate man holding a blunt weapon of blackmail. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat. My mind just registered a new data point. Trevor wasn't just a parasite. He was a threat. And in project management, you don't negotiate with a threat. You neutralize it. Trevor's threat didn't shake me. In fact, it was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. It's funny how a person's true character comes out when you stop being their favorite resource. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my work or my ethics. I simply grabbed my bag and walked out of the penthouse. I had a meeting with the only other person in that family who knew how to read a balance sheet. Mia. We met at a secure, glass-walled co-working space near the airport, a place where the hum of the air conditioning sounded like white noise for the soul. Mia was already there. As a risk auditor, she had spent her career looking for the cracks in corporate facades. Today, she was looking for the cracks in her own mother's empire. "You're late," she said, her eyes not leaving the screen. "Trevor was busy threatening to destroy my life," I replied, sitting down and opening my own laptop. "Standard procedure for them," Mia muttered. "When the credit runs out, they switch to intimidation." For the next 4 hours, we performed a forensic autopsy on Stephanie's finances. It was a masterclass in the sociology of rented power. As I watched the numbers scroll by, I realized the fundamental difference between women like Stephanie and women like me. Stephanie's status was rented. Her vineyard, her social standing, and her family legacy were all built on a foundation of shifting sand and borrowed interest. She spent her life trying to look like the person she wished she was, using other people's money to pay for the costume. But my power was owned. My competence, my project management skills, and my ability to navigate a crisis were assets that lived inside my own skin. If you took away Stephanie's money, she was a void. If you took away mine, I was still the person who could build an empire from a blank spreadsheet. "There it is," Mia said, tapping the screen. She had found it. The Willamette Valley Vineyard, the supposed crown jewel of the family, had been under a quiet foreclosure notice for 6 months. Every society luncheon Stephanie had hosted, there was a desperate play to maintain the illusion of solvency. The reality TV contract Trevor mentioned wasn't a sign of prestige, it was a Hail Mary. Stephanie had promised the production company a high society wedding, filled with tech elite, in exchange for a payout that would barely cover the back taxes on the property. The REIT, the real estate investment trust they wanted to pitch to my guests, was a ghost. There were no assets. They were planning to use my professional network to fund a Ponzi scheme, designed to save a house that had already burned down. "They aren't just broke, Kelsey," Mia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They're predatory. They were going to use your wedding as a hunting ground." Mia wasn't just helping a friend. She had discovered that Stephanie had listed her as a silent partner in a failing shell company without her knowledge, and this audit was her only way to clear her own name before the authorities stepped in. I looked at the foreclosure papers, the numbers glaring back at me in cold black ink. Trevor wasn't just a husband who made a mistake. He was the bait in his mother's trap. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. 22 hours until the ceremony. I felt a strange sense of peace. The hangar wasn't just a venue anymore. It was an auditorium for the truth. I had spent years being the invisible scaffolding for their lies, but tomorrow I was going to be the auditor who finally closed the books on the house of Trevor. Mia's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The clicking of the mouse ceased, replaced by a silence so heavy I could feel it in my teeth. She didn't look at me. She just pointed at a PDF file, hidden in a subfolder labeled Project Contingency. I leaned in, and the world didn't tilt. It just became very, very clear. It was a loan application, not for a wedding and not for the vineyard. It was a bridge loan for $450,000, secured against my future earnings and my professional certification. The date on the document was 3 weeks ago. The digital signature at the bottom, the one that requires a multi-factor authentication token I keep on my keychain, was mine. I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. Trevor had watched me work. He had seen me log into the secure airport servers 1,000 times. He knew where I kept the physical key. He hadn't just been borrowing money from my savings. He had been harvesting my identity to keep his mother's ghost of an empire from collapsing. He had been intercepting my physical mail and archiving my bank's digital alerts for weeks, using his CPA credentials to scrub the evidence before I could ever see the hard inquiry notifications on my credit report. He hadn't just forged my digital signature. He had listed my own penthouse, the one I bought with my hard-earned bonuses, as the primary collateral for that predatory loan. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, but I didn't let it show. I looked at that signature and understood the past 4 years with terrifying clarity. Every I love you, every. You're the only one who understands me. Every romantic dinner, it was all just maintenance on a high-yield asset. He didn't see a partner. He saw a AAA credit rating with a pulse. I was a liquid asset he could draw from whenever the family firm was in the red. I wasn't a bride. I was a casualty of a long con. Kelsey, Mia whispered, finally looking up. This is felony territory. This isn't just a family dispute. He used your professional credentials to commit federal wire fraud. I looked at the document. $450,000. The weight of it would have crushed most people. It would have tied me to Trevor and his mother's crimes for the next 20 years. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated my ability to trace a paper trail. As a project director, I don't just manage people. I manage accountability. I reached into my bag and pulled out an encrypted thumb drive. Download everything, Mia. Every timestamp, every IP address associated with that digital signature, and every cent of the redirection trail. I didn't call Trevor to scream. I didn't send a single text. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, a woman who specialized in white-collar crime and high-stakes litigation. I told her I had a forensic audit ready for her. The hallway outside the co-working space smelled like jet fuel and the cold, metallic realization that my husband was a predator in a bespoke suit. But as I walked toward the elevator, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. The hangar audit was no longer just about exposing a few lies at a wedding. It was about ensuring that when the floor finally dropped out from under the house of Trevor, they fell into a prison cell. I had the data. I had the witness. And in 12 hours, I would have the stage. The morning of the wedding was crisp and bright, but I didn't spend it in a salon chair surrounded by bridesmaids. I spent it in the hangar, standing on the polished concrete floor, watching the flight tracking LED screens cycle through their diagnostic tests. I wasn't wearing white lace or a veil. I was wearing a tailored ivory power suit, and heels that sounded like gunshots against the floor. At the community center downtown, I knew Stephanie and Trevor were currently standing in a drab room that smelled of floor wax and desperation. They had the reality TV crew there, ready to film the triumph of a legacy family. They were waiting for 200 high net worth guests to walk through the door, so they could begin the pitch for their fraudulent REIT. At exactly 2 p.m., the scheduled time for the ceremony, Trevor's phone must have chimed. I sent a single link to his private message and to Stephanie's. The subject line: "The board meeting is now in session." I stood on the stage at the hangar, looking out at the crowd of people who actually mattered. My mentors, my colleagues, the venture capitalists who had trusted my work for a decade. They weren't sitting in folding chairs. They were at a high-end gala I had organized, with the precision of a satellite launch. I signaled the technician. The 40-foot screens behind me flickered to life. Simultaneously, the Zoom link I sent to Trevor activated. I could see them on a small monitor, Stephanie in a garish mother-of-the-bride dress, Trevor in his tuxedo, both of them staring at their phones in that empty, echoing community center. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice projected clearly through the hangar's professional sound system. "Welcome to a different kind of celebration. Today, we aren't just celebrating a new chapter, we're celebrating an audit." I saw Trevor's face on the monitor go from confusion to a ghostly, sickly white. Behind me, I continued, gesturing to the screens, "You will see the financial health of the so-called family legacy you were all invited here to fund." The first slide was the foreclosure notice on the vineyard. The second was the trail of the $35,000 wedding deposit, redirected to a litigation fund for Mason. The third, the one that caused a collective gasp in the hangar, was the $450,000 bridge loan with my forged signature. "Trevor," I said, looking directly into the camera that was feeding back to his phone, "you wanted to use my guests as sacrificial lambs for your mother's investment scam? You wanted to use my credit as a personal overdraft? Consider this your final quarterly report." The room was silent. Even the TV crew at the community center had stopped moving. I could see Stephanie screaming at the phone, her face twisted in a mask of ugly, bankrupt rage. "You're finished," I said, the words feeling cleaner than any wedding vow ever could. "You're bankrupt both financially and morally. And since the authorities are currently waiting outside that community center to discuss the federal wire fraud documents I submitted at noon, I think it's time we adjourn." The district attorney's office had been reviewing my forensic data for hours. The warrants were signed and ready before I even stepped onto the stage, waiting for the suspects to gather in one place. I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the laptop. The 40-foot screen went black for a second, then transitioned to a beautiful, bright image of a Portland sunrise. I looked at the guests, the people who had actually seen my worth all along. "The bar is open," I said with a calm smile. And for the first time in 4 years, the bill has already been settled by me. The cameras were rolling at the community center, but not for the reason Stephanie had hoped. The family legacy pilot didn't end with a toast. It ended with a shot of Trevor being led to a cruiser in handcuffs, while Mason tried to hide behind a stack of rented folding chairs. The local news picked it up by the evening cycle. Local CPA, charged in six-figure identity theft scheme. I watched the footage once, sitting on the edge of the runway as the sun dipped below the hangar roof, and then I deleted the file. I didn't need to see it again. The audit was closed. I managed to recover the $35,000. It took 3 months of paperwork and a few very firm conversations between my lawyer and the frozen accounts of the family firm, but the money eventually cleared. I didn't use it for a vacation or a new car. Instead, I used it to establish an initial grant for the Clear Horizon Clinic, a pilot program providing emergency legal consultations for victims of financial elder abuse and identity theft. I've come to realize that justice isn't just about making the guilty pay. It's about making sure the people who were used as stepping stones have a way to stand back up. Looking back, I realized that for a long time, I was the one who was lost. I had been so focused on being the good one, the reliable one, the one who could fix everything, that I didn't see. I was just feeding a fire that was never going to keep me warm. I want to speak directly to those of you who are listening right now who feel like the black sheep or the ATM for your family. Maybe you're the person who always answers the phone at 3 in the morning to solve a crisis you didn't create. Maybe you're the one who feels like your value is only measured by what you can provide, not who you are. I want you to know that your competence is not a debt you owe to people who refuse to grow up. Your success is your own. Your credit score, your bank account, and your sanity are not family assets for someone else to liquidate. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that setting a boundary isn't an act of war, it's an act of self-preservation. It took me 32 years to realize that being at the edge of a toxic circle was actually the safest place to be. I wasn't the outcast, I was the only one who was free. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free from the weight of their expectations. I don't hate Trevor anymore. I just don't think about him. I'm too busy building a life where the foundations are made of truth, and the only thing I'm subsidizing is my own peace. If this story reminded you that your worth is owned, not rented, hit that like button. Have you ever been the ATM for a family that didn't respect you? Tell your story in the comments. We're reading every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. Thank you for joining us at DIL versus the Village.